Hello! Today we're going to be converting mixed customary units. So let's take a look at how that looks on IXL. When we convert mixed customary units, we're talking about we have one unit going to 2 units or two different types of units going to 1 unit. And when I say unit, I mean things that we're using, words that we're using to define measured amounts. So in this example, we're talking about pints and quarts. And pints and quarts measure volume. So a good example of pints and quarts would be milk. So have you ever seen these milk pint cartons? I know that we used to drink these in school, in the lunchroom. We used to get little pints of milk. But at home, we might buy a whole quart. And there are 2 pints per quart. So that means that a quart is double the amount of milk. And I know that there are 2 pints per quart because I can pull up my HiSET formula sheet, and this entire right side of the formula sheet is all unit conversion, so it's letting you know how much one unit of measurement is compared to other units of measurement. So in this case, we've got quarts and pints right there highlighted in blue. 1 quart is equal to 2 pints. Remember, that is the same on both sides of the equal sign. 2 pints is also equal to 1 quart. So here we have 2 pints and 1 quart. So we have 2 pints, and that PTS stands for pints, equals 1 quart. I know sometimes it's tricky to figure out what the different units mean. So now I have a question that's asking, what do we do basically when we have 9 pints? So here are my 9 pints. And how many quarts make up 9 pints, and are there any quarts left over? So I've got 9 pints, and I'm wondering how many quarts that makes up, and are there any pints left over? Or do they all fit evenly into quarts? So basically what we have in front of us is a division problem, because we have a big group and we want to divide it up into, we want to group up the ones that can combine together to get a smaller number. So I'm just going to group these by 2, and the reason why is because 2 is our conversion unit, 2 pints per quart. So 2, 2, 2, 2. Great. So I've got 4 groups of 2, and then I've got 1 extra just kind of hanging out. So basically for each group of 2, I have 1 quart, because there's 1 quart for every 2 pints. So I can bring this over here and represent this in quarts. So I've got my 4 quarts, and then I have my 1 leftover solitary pint. So I have 4 quarts and I have 1 pint. So that's how I would figure it out if I were doing 4 quarts and 1 pint, if I were doing it using pictures. And that's basically what's going on, is we have the same total volume of milk on both sides of these equal signs, but on one side we have 9 pints, and on the other we have 4 quarts and 1 pint. 2 different ways of talking about the same amount of measurement. So now let's talk about how we do this out in numbers. So basically, because it's a division problem, if you remember long division, you can use it here. You could say 2 goes into 9 4 times, and 4 times 2 is 8, and get a remainder of 1. So that's our 4 quarts, and that remainder is how many pints, and 1 pint. If you're like me and long division seems kind of intimidating, but you just worked on fractions, then if you have 9 over 2, remember a fraction is a division problem. Basically, you're saying, how many quarts do I have? Well, I have 9 half quarts, because each pint is a half of a quart. So I have 9 half quarts, so I have 9 halves. And then I can take that and I can plug it into the calculator using my handy dandy calculator button. So 9 calculate fraction button over 2. And what I get is 4 and 1/2. Be careful, it might simplify. You have to make sure that the denominator is still your conversion unit. If let's say my conversion unit was 4 and it simplified to 1/2, we would have an issue. We'd have to make sure that the denominator was still 4. We'll try an example with that later. So 9/2, we have 4.5. Well, 4 quarts and 1 pint is 4.5. The last way you can do it is you can use decimals. So you could take your calculator. Don't you love how there are like all these different ways to do it in math? Do whatever makes sense to you, because really it's about making the connections and using your logic. So I don't want you to just follow the process that I give you just because. I want you to really understand what's going on so that you can apply this in different situations. So if I take the calculator and I just do the division, 9 divided by 2, I'm going to get 4.5. Now 4.5, if I happen to just remember that 0.5 is 1/2, then I know that I have 4.5 and then I'm done. But not always will you get a decimal that's so easy to just translate. So what I'll do is I'll take that 4, because that's how many quarts I have, and I'll do the 4 times 2 to find out, okay, how many pints are accounted for in that whole number 4, quarts. 8 are, and then I'll do 9 minus that number and I get 1. So I have 4 quarts because that was the whole number in my decimal, and then I multiplied that by the conversion unit 2, and then I subtracted by the number in the problem 9 to get 1 pint left over. That's going to make sense to some people. If it doesn't make sense to you, don't worry. You can always use the long division. You can always use the fraction button. There are different ways to do it and to be successful. So let's go to 9 pints, 4 quarts, and 1 pint. Awesome.